If you can't accept online payments, it doesn't matter how good your copy is, how good your funnel is, you're out of business. Welcome, everybody. Today, I have a special episode. I'm going to be speaking with Alex, who's been working for me for a couple years. Alex actually leads a lot of the efforts for the podcast and social media and the writing and all this kind of stuff. And he just hears a lot about what's happening in your world in the merchant account space, or if you're an offer owner and processing payments. So I wanted to have Alex on here because he reads a lot of your comments. He gets a lot of questions. And I just wanted to bring him up so we can talk about a couple of concerns and things that we're hearing a lot on our social media, on our blog, and in our media efforts. So again, Alex, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So Alex, let's just jump right into it. Today, we're going to talk about essentially Stripe, which is a topic that, we talk about quite a bit with Direct PayNet and our merchants and so forth. But tell me what you've been hearing, online, on our blog and so forth through our different channels, what you hear people talking about lately about Stripe.
Sure. I actually just want to read you one of the more recent comments we got, if that's okay.
Cool.
We urgently need help from Stripe. A $300,000 hold was placed on one of our accounts with only a 0.19% dispute rate, and another account received a chargeback warning despite having 0% disputes. Even though we're using RDR alerts to prevent chargebacks, Stripe's risk team isn't recognizing them correctly and shut us down. We can't even refund customers on the first account, which is causing disputes to escalate. This hold is an existential risk to our business. Okay, so we get a lot of comments. I know it sounds pretty serious.
That is things exploding. Yeah. Sounds like everything's exploding there.
And it does. We get a lot of comments like this, and you get a lot of requests personally by email, they're all pretty similar. So I wanted to kind of break it down and ask you some questions about this comment to clarify for people who don't really know how all of this is working. So the first one is, if their chargeback ratio is so low, why would Stripe put a hold on it in the first place?
Well, I mean, that Stripe works with algorithms, and depending on what your merchant category code is, if, for example, this particular business had a chargeback ratio of 0.05 or half of what they have right now, and then all of a sudden it shot up to 0.19, that is very low. That's actually a great chargeback ratio for many online businesses, especially in direct response. But if their pattern is that it was a lot less, and then all of a sudden it doubled for whatever reason, for Stripe, that's off pattern. It hit one of their algorithms. And what happens with Stripe oftentimes is they suspend your account or they freeze your account, and they take time to look at it and review stuff. And you could be out of business for days or weeks, or eventually they might just shut it down completely if they do an investigation. They don't like what they see. So it is a very low dispute rate, and there is no reason, in my view, that you would get shut down with a dispute rate like that. But he must have hit one of Stripe's algorithms that they didn't like. And unfortunately, Stripe works, like I said, with algorithms. It's not actually a person who's looking at this data. So when you're working with your merchant account provider, for example, Direct PayNet, somebody on my team is going to look at your data and be like, oh, okay, maybe they had a bad month. Let's see what's going on and so forth. Stripe, you hit that algorithm, the algorithm, their AI just shuts you down and they just figure it out later. So it's pretty wild, but it all is patterns and algorithms that are set up in their account.
So would it be safe to say that Stripe is looking more at the difference between your standard ratio and the new one versus just the number? Because what is like a good chargeback ratio to keep or to stay under?
I mean, in merchant account speak, for Visa, MasterCard, and, the card brands, the number is usually 1%. It's 0.9% Visa, 1% for MasterCard chargebacks. You don't want to hit that. You want to try to be as low as possible. Generally speaking, if you're under 0.7, you should be safe. There shouldn't be any issue. Okay. So 0.19 is very low. There's a portion of fraud that's almost understood in the online environment. You can't escape chargebacks. So you will always have some, and you should expect it.
Okay. So if they have been operating for months or a year and had, like you said, a 0.05% chargeback ratio, and now it's 0.19, that could set off their flags, the red
Yeah.
flags,
Yeah.
because it just jumped, it more than doubled.
Yes.
So they're
So
looking at like that difference as opposed to just the number, which is well in the safety zone. It's just because it was such a huge leap.
yes. And also, we have to look at the amount. He's saying they're holding 300,000. So, he may be
Yeah.
processing $1 million or more a month. And 0.19% is a significant amount of money for Stripe to lose, for example. And also, without getting too in depth in the algorithm, maybe his refunds also shot up. Maybe his refunds went up, to 3%. That's an indicator to Stripe that there's going to be more fraud coming because refunds are going up, chargebacks have gone up. So, that probably is how he hit the algorithm. Also keep in mind, it really depends. It's very industry specific. So Stripe is a little bit at war with digital content merchants, supplement merchants, everybody who's in the kind of direct to consumer space. Stripe is not really liking these industries and is making it very difficult to do business with them. So it's a combination of, the accounts patterns, like what he's done in the past and how this has jumped, his refund rate, if it jumped in consequence. I would say I'm fairly confident given his, his post there, his refund rates probably shot up quite a bit as well. And in addition, he's probably in a merchant category code that's a direct response, like for example, supplements or digital content. In fact, digital content seems to be the industry of choice for Stripe to attack these days. So, all these in combination hit a couple algorithms. And, unfortunately for him, they don't talk to him first and try to figure out. They freeze the account, put him out of business for a bit, and then figure it out.
Okay. And if they have a hold placed, how can this business continue processing?
Well, I mean, this is my favorite question. And hindsight is 2020, as they say. The ideal thing, especially when you're processing big numbers like this, you're doing, they're holding 300K is what he's saying. So obviously, he's processing 500,000, million, maybe even more. I don't know what percentage, but usually they hold up about 30% is what we see a lot with Stripe. They just hold 30%. So he's probably processing close to $1 million per month. With something as vital as accepting credit card payments in an online business, it boggles my mind all the time when, businesses come to me and say, Stripe shut me down. How quickly can you get me set up? Getting a merchant account, we can link another episode, but it does take 1 or 2 weeks because all the stuff that Stripe ignores when they onboard you, we do it. So we verify all these things. We know about your business. We know what you're selling. We know your financials. We know everything. And then we approve you. So then you don't get these types of surprises. Stripe just lets you just start processing. We'll figure it out later. Well, later happens. You're making $1 million a month. They shut you down. So anyway, kind of going back to your question, his options are very limited at this point in the sense of like getting started right away, because it sounds like Stripe is his only option right now. He does not have a backup. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm working with Stripe, things are going well. Keep in mind, these things can happen. You can have a bad month. You can be hit by a fraud ring. These things unfortunately happen to a lot of online businesses. You should be preparing yourself by having an adequate backup. Like you should have a backup merchant account. If you can't accept online payments, it doesn't matter how good your copy is, how good your funnel is, you're out of business. So it should definitely be something that you have a backup for. Now, if you're in the situation that you're listening to this and it's like, oh, well, they shut me down and now I'm kind of screwed. What I would probably suggest is get set up with another third-party provider, like, for example, Activate PayPal, there's Adyen, Checkout.com, all these kind of third-party type services while you are applying for a merchant account. Merchant accounts can take 1 or 2 weeks. So, have your backup do what it needs to do right away so your business doesn't go out of business again so quickly. And then what you can do is start applying for your backup merchant account, and then at least you'll have both options. Now, if the third party shuts you down, odds are you may have a couple of days, a week before they do it, right? So at least you'll buy yourself time. So buy yourself time by working with another third party while you get yourself a merchant account. And then, remember, my advice is make sure you have at least two options. Ideally, one that's a merchant account, which is your control, and maybe one that's a third party option. And you can proceed like that. Now, one thing I just want to caution, I get this question all the time. Why don't I just open up another Stripe account? Stripe is pretty smart. It's literally the biggest payments company in the world. There's a lot of AI behind it, a lot of data manipulation. If you just open another account with Stripe, you'll be done within the day. Like they'll figure it out that same day and you'll be shut down again. So don't open up with Stripe, open up with somebody else.
Okay. So would it be safer then to have a Stripe account as your backup instead of having a merchant account as your backup? Or would you recommend just merchant account, your primary account, and another merchant account as your backup?
I would say it depends what your market is and who you're selling to, which countries and so forth. So Stripe does a couple of things well. Stripe accepts a lot of multiple currencies in various countries, which is kind of expensive when you have your own merchant account. When I say that is because let's say you have a US merchant account, you're a US merchant, you have a US merchant account, and you want to add pounds and euros and all this kind of stuff. It starts getting expensive with monthly fees on the merchant account side. Now, if you have a legitimate market and it's big enough, the fees are nominal. But if it's like a couple of payments here and there, it's a little bit of a hassle and a bit of a headache to set it up with your merchant account versus Stripe that does like the dynamic currency conversion. So I would say in that case, send all your US volume to your merchant account, send your international volume to Stripe, and together you have a great solution going. And then you can mix in a couple of US sales in Stripe and a couple of international sales on your merchant account just to kind of mix things up. If you're strictly US, like you're 90% plus of your sales are happening in the States and you're American and so forth, American business, you're pretty safe having your own merchant account. Your conversion rates are going to be good. You're going to be working directly with a human versus, an AI. So I would say 2 merchant accounts is probably a better solution in that case. And now a third scenario is just to add obviously a little bit more complexity to this, but it also depends what you're selling. If you're a digital content merchant, I'd probably stay away from Stripe at this point. They're just, like I said, they're going to war. If you're selling supplements, same thing. But if you have kind of just like regular e-commerce or something a little bit more benign in terms of an offer, then, Stripe could be a good idea.
Okay. And if this sort of thing happens on like a Shopify store, because Shopify and Stripe are pretty tightly knit, would you say that it's riskier for the business? Because from my perspective, if you use Stripe, you can put Stripe on any store, on any website. You just link it in the back end. But if you use Shopify, they want you to use Shopify payments, which we all know is Stripe, basically. So if Shopify payments is shutting you down or placing this hold, which will probably lead to closure, does that mean your entire store is closed? Whereas with Stripe, you might have the store, but people can't buy from it. Whereas on Shopify, because they are the same product almost,
yeah,
will it just say like the store is inactive? You can't even look at it.
No. So there's Shopify payments, and then there's Shopify, the actual kind of store platform. They are very interlaced, and Shopify does want you to use Shopify payments when you're working with them, but you are not forced to. So for example, if you get shut down with Shopify payments, they won't shut down your Shopify store. It's still there. You can then go in and decide, for example, to get a merchant account, and you can get it plugged in through authorize.net. Authorize.net, okay, just to clarify for everybody, is a gateway that connects to thousands of different payment processors. So whether you're working with DirectPayNet or any single processor in the US, you could probably get them to plug into authorize.net, so you can then plug that into Shopify and you're in business. And as you said, Shopify payments is literally just a white label of Stripe. It's the same thing. So if you're like, Shopify screwed me, I'm going to use Stripe. Same thing. You're doing the same thing. So no difference.
Okay. And this hold, so there's a $300,000 hold. Stripe is holding this for a reason.
Yeah.
right? So if anything comes through like chargebacks, like refund requests, does it come from that hold? Like, will Stripe pay it out through the hold, or does the merchant have to pay the business, have to pay separately from their own
I love this question,
account?
Alex. I love this question. I know you're getting this question from a lot of people that get very confused about this, and they come to us and they're like, "Well, what? They're holding $300,000, but I still have to pay for
Right,
chargebacks?" Yes, you do.
right.
This is what happens. And unfortunately, I have to say this. It's also the case with merchant accounts with any payment processor. So if you have a reserve account, for example, or a processor is holding money, you are still liable and responsible to pay out any chargebacks or refunds. So Stripe is still going to debit your account for a chargeback that comes in versus take it out of that 300. That 300 is there as a security for them. So if you default, you go bankrupt and they have to refund, let's say, a year's worth of transactions or whatever warranty that you had or whatever time period you promised services for these customers, that's what it's there for. So if for this particular business that he's saying 300,000 is being held, and let's say he gets 20K of chargebacks that come in, they're going to debit it out of his business bank account, not out of the 300K. And if he decides, for example, I'm not paying them, I want them to take out of the 300K, you got to be really, really careful doing stuff like that. That means you're defaulting. You're not paying your fees and your dues, and they may match list you. I don't want to get too far into the match list. Like let's link an episode on the match list down below because we have a couple. But what match list is basically you're blacklisted. You're like bankrupt in the merchant account world. It's very hard for you to get a merchant account or any kind of payment processing when you're match listed. So, don't play games like that as like I'm not going to pay them or this or that. Like just make sure you get your business up and running. Number one priority, right? You don't want to bleed any more money. Number two, try to negotiate how to get your money back from Stripe. Again, we have a couple of episodes on how to get your money back from Stripe. Alex is going to link them down below. And, you try to negotiate getting your money while you're keeping your business afloat. But ultimately, don't withhold money. Make sure money's there to fund any refunds and chargebacks and so forth, because it'll get you into more trouble if there isn't.
So going off of this, this business also said that their account is frozen and they can't process refunds even in they said their first account, which I guess they have too, but they can't process the refund. So how will they pay out the refund? And then does that automatically mean those refund requests will turn into chargebacks? Because if a customer can't succeed in the refund, they can just go through their bank to get it.
Yeah,
which then increases their chargeback ratio.
Yeah, it's if a customer wants a refund and you can't give them one, then they'll probably go to their bank, but it doesn't necessarily, maybe some people won't, you know what I mean? We can't guarantee a refund 100%, but yes, of course, if somebody wants a refund, they can't get one, well, they're going to call their bank and they're going to get it that way. So it will definitely increase chargebacks. Stripe should allow them to continue processing refunds. So the first email I would have to Stripe is, please enable my account to be able to process refunds. These refunds are, refund requests are coming in. We're unable to fund them, which is causing us an increase in chargebacks. Period. End of story. There's a couple of different email addresses for Stripe, one that might work a little bit better. And these email addresses change because as people talk about them, then Stripe changes them up because they get too many requests and they don't want that. They want people to go through like their crappy AI customer support. So it's here to help at stripe.com. Right now, that seems to be kind of the email address that seems to be yielding an actual human being looking and so forth. But technically, they should not refuse you to refund your customers. What I would say is tell them you would like refund capabilities for, let's say, 60 to 90 days, or give them a specific time. I would like to be able to refund for the next 60 days or for the next 90 days, depending on what's logical for your business. Because if you don't give them a time limit, they're going to say, no, we can't, because they're not going to give you unlimited amount of time to have access to this account to refund. That's the unfortunate part, because you're like, who cares? Why not? It's because it causes more fees for them, and they may not be able to collect those fees from you without getting super complex here. If they feel like they're not going to be able to collect money from you for fees, they'll shut you down. So you want to give them a very limited time period. Hey, I need refund capabilities for the next 60 days on my account. Thank you so much. That's it.
Easy.
Yeah.
Last
Easy.
question is about it's about the chargeback alerts. So why would Stripe block these third-party chargeback alerts? I know that Stripe offers their own.
Yes.
Is that why?
No. So there's a couple of different types of alerts. There's RDR, Rapid Dispute Resolution. There's Ethica, and there's Verify. There's a service called Charge Blast, which is basically the chosen service, I guess, from Stripe to manage these types of alerts. And it happened also on merchant accounts and so forth. RDR alerts, just to give you a quick idea of what it is, an RDR alert is an alert that comes directly from Visa that says, this customer is thinking of charging back, and it auto refunds the transaction. So you don't actually need to do anything. It's just Visa says this is an alerted transaction that looks like it's going to be refunded. And then they just refund it for you quickly and you're done. Ethica and Verify alerts are alerts that you get an alert and you have to either try to resolve it with the customer or you refund it yourself. So those are the three types of alerts that are available. I'm not going to get too into it. It's important that you know that these alerts exist because you might not want all of them. Some of them kind of piggyback on each other. It starts costing a lot of money. But RDR alerts, because they're auto refunds, what happens sometimes is that the timing of doing the auto refund and so forth, a chargeback kind of notification might have come in. And there's some processors and Stripe as well that for some reason they're tagging RDR alerts as chargebacks because of the timing of how these things happen. They're saying, hey, it's a chargeback. So it's not. It's a refund. It counts as a refund. That makes a really big difference, right? Your chargeback ratio versus your refund ratio. Chargeback ratio is actually a lot more serious for you than a refund ratio. So, what I would definitely recommend, especially for merchants and businesses, like what this fellow said here about RDR is not working or whatever the case is, go into your RDR supplier account, download the transactions that were tagged for RDR, and then take a look to see if Stripe is tagging these as chargebacks. If they are, you have to correct them. Again, send them an email, say, these are the transactions that went through RDR. You guys have now posted these as chargebacks. It's not a chargeback. It was a refund. That's the problem with using a provider that's integrated into Stripe. They have the data. So they see all these RDRs come in, and that again triggers the algorithm to be like, oh, damn. Okay, well, that was an RDR. He's getting too many RDRs. That's too much risk. That could lead to chargebacks and so on and so forth. So, using too many components within Stripe is not my favorite thing. And sometimes if you can rely on a third party, it might be better. And this is one situation where you might want to get alerts that are not managed by Stripe. So that way you can process your alerts, refund, and they just see them as refunds. They don't know the data that it's coming in. So like Charge Blast is directly integrated to Stripe. So like it goes through the same kind of process. Stripe sees this. So you want to try to avoid that.
Okay. And you've said this before, but when people sign up for alerts, they really need to go into their settings and configure it to their business. Because I imagine part of this might be because they added this on, they're paying for it, but they just left it as it is. Or maybe didn't really understand some of the settings that they toggled on or off.
Yeah, I mean, alerts are not a set it and forget it. Any type of fraud measures or you got to make sure, you can't, it's like when you take something out of the box, you have to tinker with it to make sure that it works. Like you get an alarm clock, you got to put the time that you want to wake up and all this kind of stuff. Same thing with alerts. You take it, they have some standard settings in there and you have to tinker with it. Like for example, for RDR, auto refunds and so forth, what you can do is you can say, I have some different businesses like high ticket coaching and all that. They're like, hey, I don't want to auto refund things that I'm selling for $3,000. You know what I mean? That's madness. Like, so what you want is maybe to say, I will auto refund transactions that are under $100 or whatever makes sense for you financially, depending on what, your customer value is, how much you're paying for traffic, whatever. And then, Anything above that, I want to get the alert and I want to work it. I want to actually call the customer, figure out what happened and so forth. Now, one thing to keep in mind with alerts, you have very little time. You have 24 hours. If you don't respond within 24 hours, and I'm not saying a business day, 24 hours, you could get alerts on Saturday. You have 24 hours to get back to them. And if you don't, then your alert provider tags it as lost. So meaning chargeback's probably going to come through. So you have to work very quickly, but you can modify it, for example, for a certain amount. Now, I have some, customers in some businesses that are like, I want to review all of them and make a decision at that point and so forth. All you're doing is you're adding yourself extra work. If you have transactions that are $20 or $30, trust me, it's going to cost you way more to get the chargeback, have somebody reply to the chargeback, review why it was chargeback and all that, than just giving them that refund. I know it sucks. It actually really, really sucks because you're like, a lot of these people, they bought, a lot of customers actually bought the product and so forth. They may have had buyer's remorse or forgot that they bought it or whatever the case is. But sometimes it's not worth, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, in the sense of like, is it worth it for you to spend all this time on a $20 or $30 transaction? On a $1,000 transaction, maybe it is. So take a look at your settings, make sure it's configured properly for your business model, for you to auto refund certain things and work certain things and so forth. And, communicate. And then one last thing that I want to say about this is what you want to do is look at your RDR and your different alerts, whatever you have set up, and look at your processing statement with Stripe, with your processor, whoever it is. Sometimes these alerts happen so often and they don't talk to each other. It may look like it's a chargeback or it came in as a chargeback, but then the customer's bank just retracts that chargeback because a refund came in. You can get refunded for the alerts, and you can also talk to your processor or Stripe or whoever you're working with to remove these as chargebacks so they don't hit your record. So, it's important that people do a reconciliation. As boring as it is, if you have an accountant, the bookkeeper, whatever, this should be part of your monthly reconciliation, taking your RDRs, your ethicas, your verifies, whatever alerts you have, and making sure that they're not on, they haven't been tagged as chargebacks on your merchant statement.
Okay. And really, the moral of all of this is to have a backup.
Yes. And we turn around and we get back to the start. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to be held captive like by any one provider, right? So make sure you have a backup in place. If you're working with Stripe and you love them and it works well, it's a good solution tech wise. It does work well and stuff like that until it doesn't. You know what I mean? So I do want to say that getting a backup is very easy, in the sense it's easy to set up, just as easy as it is to set up Stripe on a tech perspective. It's just as easy to plug in Authorize.net or NMI or any gateway into whatever shopping cart you're working with. So don't be worried, oh, this is going to take a lot of dev time or all this or that. None of that. The only difference is there's some paperwork that needs to be submitted at the beginning, an application, so forth, because as I said, we do verifications before we onboard you to tell you if yes, we want to work with you or no, or whatever the case is. So puts your mind at ease. But just the last thing that I need to remind everybody listening, if you do set up a backup, use it. So if you set up a backup merchant processor and you just leave it dormant for like a year and a half, whatever the case is, guess what? That processor doesn't know anything about your business. So if you get shut down from Stripe and all of a sudden they get 100% of your volume, they're going to start doing checks, verifications, and so forth, and may ask for your Stripe statements to see why, all of a sudden the account's dormant, and it may not bode very well for you. So what you want to do is you want to set up a backup and actually use it. Even if it's minimal, let's say you're doing 100K a month, you say, I'll do 90K on Stripe, I'll do 10K on my merchant account. If there's some kind of regular volume, it's all good. Like you can switch it on at any point in time. If there's zero volume and then all of a sudden it just gets 100% of your volume, it's going to trigger some risk and some alarm bells also at the processor level. So you don't want to do that. Set up the backup, use it a little bit, and make sure you put in a little bit of volume there. Ideally, my suggestion is to put 25% of your volume there, but whatever makes sense. Just don't leave it dormant.
Is there a minimum monetary value that you would say, like minimum 10K a month or 5K or 2.5?
I mean, a bank is there to make money. A processor is technically, kind of like a banking and financial institution. They got to make money. So they don't like dormant accounts. It costs them money to have dormant accounts. A lot of
It is.
times we see after 6 months, dormant accounts just close. Like the bank's like, close it down. It's not using it. We don't need the extra maintenance for merchants that are not using it. So I wouldn't say, I would say 10K is probably where you want to be, if not a little bit higher. But it depends on what volume you're doing more than anything. If you're doing $25,000 a month, okay, well, maybe, 3 to 5,000 makes sense. If you're doing $1 million a month, well, no, 10,000 is not enough, because then, that doesn't
Sure.
really make sense. So if you're doing 100,000, then you want to think about maybe 10K, 20K or whatever, ideally 25K to have that 25%, but at least 10K. I would say at minimum, if we had to quantify it, you'd want to be doing at least 10 to 25% of your volume on your backup account.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering all of these questions.
This was fun. Thank you, Alex. And I hope everybody listening got some value. Alex really knows the business quite well, in the sense of like reading your comments and reading, all your posts and stuff like that. And, we do get a lot of feedback and emails from different people asking us questions. So I wanted to have this episode because I think it brings a lot of value to not just have me kind of talking, to have Alex really show me your questions and ask some pertinent information. So thanks again, Alex, and have yourself a great day, everyone.